Welcome to the Nerd Party.
In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. Happy Halloween, everybody. It's Halloween, in case you didn't realize. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge, and I'm the person informing you of a holiday you already know. You know what day it is. So I am very excited because we are going to be watching one of my favorite horror movies, a film that neither of my two very special guest hosts have seen. That film is Eraserhead, directed by David Lynch. And our two guest hosts are none other than Annie Black. Welcome, Annie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's been so long.
And you're supposed to say that I'm the greatest podcast
You're
host.
the greatest podcast host of all time.
Thank
That's
you.
obvious.
Wow.
I don't have to say that.
Annie, thank you so much. Wow, that's so sweet of you to say. And we also have Scott Russell returning again to the show after a long absence. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Shawn. Good to be back on the finest podcast ever committed to audio recording.
Guys, wow.
Of all time.
So sweet. Wow, this is totally not prepped at all. I didn't even plug the Nerd Party. That's how disorganized I am. So the Nerd Party, of course, if you are listening to this, you probably know what the Nerd Party is. It's a collection of podcasts dedicated to all things entertainment. So make sure you're following us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, like the Facebook page, The Nerd Party, and follow us on Instagram at The Nerd Party. Let's talk about Eraserhead, shall we? This is very exciting because this is one of my favorite films ever, and I love David Lynch so much. This is the first film I ever saw of his. In college, a buddy of mine came to visit me, and he came from out of town, and he said, "Shawn, I have a movie we're gonna watch as soon as I get there." So he brought the DVD of Eraserhead. We sat in my cramped dorm room, all the lights off, and we put it on my shitty TV and watched this baffling film. I knew nothing about David Lynch. I knew nothing about Eraserhead. And this was the first thing my friend was like, "We have to do this. Like, we're doing this." And I wasn't sure what was happening. I'm still not sure to this day, every time I watch it, what's happening in this film, but I know I love it. That first viewing was very baffling and didn't convert me when I first watched it. It just sort of terrified me. And now I think it might be my favorite David Lynch movie, but I don't know. Scott, where are you on David Lynch in general?
I've got a pretty small chunk of experience relative to everything he's done, but the main question that I have based on what I know about David Lynch to this point is, would you say that this is a legitimately horrifying horror movie? I feel like even the scary stuff I've seen from Lynch always feels it's a little dreamy and sort of oddly charming, even when it's getting dark. So it was this more like nightmare fuel, or is this still Lynchian in that kind of genial way, would you say?
I'd say a healthy mixture of both, like without spoiling anything. Like this is for sure. Like, I think in general, I mean, we're watching this, we're recording this before Halloween, but this is the official Missing Frames Halloween episode for 2021. I think this is a fitting film for a Halloween episode. I think you can totally put this in a horror movie rotation, even though in some ways it is what you described, Scott, where it's like a more dreamlike. It's certainly very nightmarish. I think it's a short film. It's like an hour and 20 minutes, but it's like an hour and 20 minutes of very distilled, like, I don't want to say too much, but I will say I think it is fitting to watch the film on Halloween. It's not like outright horror, but it's weird, it's disturbing, and has that Lynchian sense of humor. But I think of all his movies, it's certainly one of the darker ones and weirder ones.
Sure.
That even is, like, I feel like that's a given. But
it seems like an ideal go in knowing nothing movie. I'm glad to be doing it that way.
I would certainly approve of that method of watching this film. But Annie, tell me, where are you sitting on David Lynch? Are you a fan? Have you seen anything of his?
Yes, so I am a fan of David Lynch. I like his films. I'm not super experienced in him. I've seen Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me and some of the new Twin Peaks I didn't finish the old one, but I've seen, I know what's happening. And I saw Mulholland Drive during
Oh,
quarantine.
okay.
Yeah, that was something that I watched. And I know nothing about Eraserhead. The only Eraserhead anecdote I have is one year for Halloween in Jacksonville, Florida, where Scott is from too.
Woo.
Shout out to Jacksonville.
Whoa, man.
Wow.
Jacksonville
I was
takeover.
home. I was home and I was at, I believe, Root Down, which is a bar in Jacksonville, and it was Halloween and everyone was in costume. And I ran into a friend and RIP, this friend died. RIP Indy.
Oh
But
my
this was
gosh.
years later, so not related to the story at all, but just like
It's got
side
really
note.
depressing.
Side note, RIP. But back to Eraserhead, he was dressed as Eraserhead.
Oh
Oh,
no.
okay.
And that was my first experience with this character because I had no I asked him, I was like, did someone electrocute you? And he was like, I'm Eraserhead. And I was like, oh, totally know what that means. And I just walked away. No clue. And I did not look it up.
No, why
So
would you?
I
Why would
too
you?
am fresh into not knowing what this is. But I will say, I have been very fond of David Lynch's weather reports over the last year. I don't know
Oh
if
my
y'all have
God.
seen that.
Scott, have you seen the
They're
weather report, Scott?
they're very lovely. I've mostly
They're so
seen
good.
screen caps, but what I have seen are very, very nice.
It's nice, uplifting. It's great.
Yes, he is a delightful gentleman and like very in contrast with the films he makes. Like I think if you like ran into him and had a conversation with him, you would never guess that he was the director behind the film we are about to watch. But part of the reason this is such a wonderful, fascinating film is that this was basically his debut feature. He did it himself, I think, using I think he was attending the American Film Institute in California, and they basically had all these stables that were not being used, and they were like, "Hey, why don't you live there?" And he was like, "Great, I'm going to turn these into film studios and build all my sets here." And and I think over the course of like 4 years, he just used that space to film this movie. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this film did take 4 years or so to
Wow.
shoot, and
I
I
had
mean,
no
he
idea
did
it
it
was
himself.
his. Had no idea it was his feature debut.
Yeah, because he'd done some short films, but this was the first feature he'd done. And I'm looking through my notes, aka Wikipedia, and
There is
I
a gap between his last mid '70s short and then Eraserhead in '77. There, so it looks like there are a couple years there that he was working on it.
there's some incredible stuff in this movie that he is. There's certain effects that he is not. He will not comment on how he made them, which makes it all the more disturbing.
I
And we'll
love that.
discuss
Ooh.
more in part 2 of the episode once we know what we're talking about. But this was also, I think, George Lucas loved this movie so much that he actually offered David Lynch the opportunity to direct Return of the Jedi. Have you heard this story?
I've never
No.
heard that in my life.
There's a great yes. David Lynch was actually I think he was the runner-up to direct Return of the Jedi.
Oh my god!
And I can't imagine what that would have been. I think it's
What
funny
a
that he
missed
was
opportunity.
Release the Lynch cut.
Yeah, I know. I would love to see it. I think what's funny is he was so outwardly like, I don't want to direct that movie, and then a couple years later he did Dune. But the story is on. You can find it. Look up that David Lynch Return of the Jedi. Like it's him describing the experience of denying George Lucas, like, no, sorry, declining that offer. But he basically talks about how George Lucas is like walking him around the Skywalker Ranch or like the studio and showing him photos, and he's like, this is a Wookiee, and David Lynch is like, and I started to get a really bad headache, and by the time he's explaining what these creatures are, the headache is a full-blown migraine. Like it's just like the funniest thing ever.
Oh my
But yeah,
God.
so just think of that as you're watching Eraserhead. Just think like, oh yeah, George Lucas saw this and thought that's the man to direct the grand conclusion to my great Star Wars trilogy.
That was a good Lynch impression.
Thank
It
you.
was-
Oh man, I pride myself on my Lynch impressions. That's about the only thing. Not my podcasting skills, not anything else, but David Lynch. I can do a really mean David Lynch impression, and it's
That's
the
it.
best. Yeah,
Oh,
there you
man.
go.
Can you wait? What's the weather tomorrow? Let's hear it.
It's a bright and beautiful blue skies. Have a great day.
Yes.
I will.
There you go. That's it.
Now I will.
Oh my God,
Thank you.
David Lynch
Thank
is
you,
on
Mr.
this
Lynch.
podcast.
Wow! Oh my God!
He's
Yeah, he
fronting the
would.
episode.
That would make me so happy. Just if he happened to walk in any of our rooms, just like, "What's up, everybody?" Like, he would not say "What's up." He would be like, "Wow, it's a great day. What a pleasure to be on a podcast." I want to. Typically, at this point, I ask the guest host, and in this case, since we have two, I'm going to ask you two to tag team this, to work together and collaborate. You haven't seen the film, but I want you to try to tell me what you think Eraserhead is about. I don't know if one of you wants to take point and the other can provide support, but I'll leave that to you to decide.
Annie, the first thing I'll say is that I was surprised to hear you say there's actually a character named Eraserhead in the movie.
I
don't
mean,
know if
I
that's his-
don't
I don't think
know.
that's his name.
Okay, I would have believed
that
either
was
way.
just.
It seems.
I think he meant it more as like Eraserhead, like
That
don't
makes
you
sense.
get it? And I was like, that's the guy's name.
Like saying I'm Mulholland Drive, and you're like dressed
Right.
as Naomi Watts. Yeah, Annie, I'm open to however you want to approach this, mainly because I have no idea where to begin. I know nothing.
right,
I know
so-
nothing.
Okay. All right. Let's go with what I know. It's a guy in a suit with
That's correct.
crazy hair.
Yes.
So,
okay.
all right. Here we go. Hear me out. Just spitballing here.
You got it.
He's big city guy, and he goes to work one day, and he's wearing a suit at work.
I can see it.
Yeah. So far, so good. This sounds
Okay.
exactly like every David Lynch movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, okay, so he's
It's a
going to
typical
work.
day, going to work. Yep.
Is that a suit? And someone is like, "Oh my God, what's
Your
on your
Eraserhead."
head?" And he's like, "What do you mean? It's my hair." And they're like, "Oh my God, no! Like, look in the mirror." And he looks in the mirror and sees his crazy hair. And Scott, you take over.
That begins a 80-minute hallucination sequence where he looks deep into his own soul and sees all the horrors within. And then you have end credits.
Okay, I was gonna say all I'll say is one of you is much closer to the accurate description of the film. than
Annie
the
was
other.
making too much sense, I gather.
Yeah, I will not say who, but I was gonna say like Annie, this is way too coherent to be a David Lynch movie. But yeah, okay,
Plot,
so
just vibes.
that's it. So but like feelings about watching this this is a movie you're excited to watch? Like, is this something you've been wanting to check off, or is this kind of like all right, Shawn, how you made me come on your amazing podcast and I hate you.
I mean,
how are we feeling?
If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure both Scott and myself volunteered to do this episode. I think we both said like, let's do it or something. I don't even remember.
Yeah, that's actually true. Let's point
Yeah,
out
like
that,
I think this started on Twitter.
I think on Twitter, like it was like we shared 5 favorite horror films. It was like some trending like 5
Yes.
favorite
That's
horror
right.
films.
The quote
And
tweet.
Yes.
I selected Eraserhead as one of them, and Scott was like, "Oh, I've never seen that." I said Missing Frames, and Annie
I
said,
said,
"Whoa, whoa, whoa!"
I want to come. Don't leave
And
me out.
that's how all of this happened. So you two are really to blame for anything that happens in this episode.
It was meant to be.
It's
It was
true.
meant to be.
So yeah, with that being said, like I am so ready, so excited, so amped. I'm gonna be confused, but it's gonna be okay.
I'm definitely
Scott,
I'm definitely ready for an experience that makes no sense. I think that's maybe the reason why I haven't flown through the Lynches that I haven't seen, is because I feel I've seen enough to get the general tone, and he like you were alluding to before, he's the kind of guy who wants there to be questions about his work. He wants them to provoke thoughts that he's not going to dictate. Like he has the quote where he talks about like doing press cycles around movies, and he's like, then comes the talking. No. The film is the talking, or whatever he says. It'd sound better if you said it. But
that was good.
I respect that he makes films that are open to a bunch of different interpretations, but as a new dad, you understand this. I don't have the time to sit there and think for 30 minutes about what I just watched. So I think that's what's been my hesitance with Lynch. But, flip side of that coin is I'm excited to just dive in and just feel what I feel and, go along for the ride.
I am so excited for both of you, and I'm excited for our listeners to hear the second half of this wonderful Halloween episode of Missing Frames. Stay tuned. We'll be back to discuss Scott and Annie's thoughts on David Lynch's Eraserhead.
Now available to own on video cassette.
All right, we're back. Annie has a glass of wine. Scott looks very upset. I guess
also has wine.
Yeah. I should have brought some. I don't drink. Though this movie was the fourth time I watched it. I feel like every time I watch it, I'm a little bit closer to needing substances of some kind to ease the nerves. But Scott, let's start with you. What are your feelings about David Lynch's Eraserhead? I guess I want to ask you, do you think this does qualify as a Halloween-worthy horror movie?
I think so. I think it's kind of undoubtedly a horror movie in just that creeping sense of dread the whole time. Like, I think the thing that stuck out to me the most, kind of in general, but especially in terms of its overall spookiness, is the sound of it. Just how there's constantly that like low like hum or like whirring noise, like every like location they go to, there's always some strange white noise kind of just like tap dancing on your nerves in the background. So even before I saw anything that I can never again unsee, I was uncomfortable in a compelling way.
Annie, what do you think?
Oh my God. Okay, so what do I think?
Annie, well, first, did it I hope you're not disappointed that it didn't remotely match the brilliant plot description you came up with. But
no, okay.
I hope you still made it through.
From the opening scene, I thought about what I had assumed the movie was about, and then I thought about what Scott had assumed the movie was about, and your reaction being that Scott was obviously very much closer. And from the beginning, I was like, okay, like, I guess I'm in for a ride. I have no idea what to expect at this point. It was a lot. As David as David Lynch's first film, I've thought a lot about this in the past. I watched it an hour ago.
Literally
so
finished it. Both of you just finished it. So we're going fresh into the conversation. Okay.
I've had a lot to process in the last 45 minutes to an hour.
A lot to drink.
No, actually, this is the first glass, actually. But yeah, so David Lynch's first film, Eraserhead, was a trip. I don't even know where to begin. And like, all right, we have to start in the opening.
Let's start at the beginning.
Let's start at the beginning. All right, the opening scenes, which is just like, he's like, I don't know, is he in space? Is he like, I have no idea what's happening. He's sideways the entire time, and it's like that for like 10 minutes, and I'm sitting here like, please tell me that there's more. Truly,
I kind of just accepted that I wasn't going to understand that initial sequence until maybe
very
later
early
in the
on.
movie.
Yes. You're like, okay, I guess I need to surrender myself to it. I wish I could go back to, I mean, I kind of can. I told the story. It was, I mean, just imagine a really close friend of yours, like coming to visit you at college, and it's like, we're gonna hang out, we're gonna have fun, and he's like, no, why should we go outside in the beautiful summer night when we can stay in your dorm room and watch this movie and pitch dark, like just shut off all the lights and watch this film. And having never seen David Lynch before, having no clue what to expect, just that I think what probably impressed me, and I guess I should say terrified me at the time, was how utterly all encompassing this vision is. Like it pulls you in, and you're immediately just like in this nightmare world, and it's like, I don't want to be here, I don't know what's going on, and I feel weird. I feel very, very weird, like Scott was saying. I think that sound design is so brilliant. I think it was David Lynch and Alan Splett, just like, I don't know what they did. I think it was just like weird, like just very, they just found a way to make natural sounds like that. They basically handmade, like this entire movie is. They just made the soundtrack out of things they found, and then they would speed it up or slow it down to make it appropriately creepy. But I remember feeling very, very similarly to Scott, just being sort of like, oh no, what have I done? I should never have invited my friend Matt to hang out with me. And also just like feeling completely hypnotized and just like, all right, I guess, well, it's only about 90 minutes, so at least
Yeah,
it'll be over soon.
the 90 minutes was something that I kept coming back to mentally throughout the movie. It was like, all right, Annie, it's been about 45. There's only 45 to go. And it wasn't because I wasn't enjoying it, because I think I liked Eraserhead. Like it was challenging to watch in a good way. Like you didn't know what was happening at any given moment or what was to come. There weren't a lot, like as you got into it, there were some, common themes and like little motifs, like the singing lady with the big cheeks. What's her deal? Who's to say? But
The
she
lady
comes
in the
back a couple
radiator.
times.
I mean, yeah, it's just your average everyday radiator lady who sings songs
Yeah,
that
she's
Modest Mouse also sings songs of.
oh my
That was when
David.
I was like, when she sang the In Heaven, I was like, oh, that's a Modest Mouse thing. I guess they got it from this. I can't remember the name. Working on Leaving the Living, I think is the name of the song.
I've
Mhm.
heard
Um,
I've heard that Pixies and I think Bauhaus have also covered it as well.
That
oh,
feels
that's
right.
great.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
I read? So I did a smidge of research post watching. Did I read that David Lynch wrote that song? Like
He
he
did.
wrote
hmm
the lyrics?
Hmm.
Wild. Is that
We
common? Does
all
he write music often?
Well, he does. He actually,
Hmm.
there are David Lynch albums you can stream.
Oh,
That are He just
amazing.
produces his own music because he's a man of many talents,
Hmm.
and I would highly recommend that everybody
And
who.
he records also as a thought gang with Angelo Badalamenti, for the composer from
Huh.
Twin Peaks.
Yeah, yeah, and he did Blue Velvet and I think a couple other David Lynch films too, but
Gosh, I feel like I know so much already about David Lynch, but there's so much more to learn. Like crazy.
well, it's funny. I was so deeply disturbed, but I was not remotely prepared for it the first time I watched it, and so deeply disturbed by it. And what's funny is a few years ago, my wife and I we bought Twin Peaks, having never seen it. We're just kind of like, well, you should get this. It's on sale. Let's just buy it and
That's a good
let's
buy.
start watching it. And we did, and we were like, this is fascinating. And that kind of, I don't know, it was right before I moved to Atlanta, strangely enough, and I it just triggered something in my brain. And I think right after we bought Twin Peaks, Criterion Collection did a sale, and I was like, well, I should get Eraserhead. I only saw it once and it was so disturbing, but I need to own it. And then like just sprung it on Sarah. I'd only seen it once a few years later, or a few years prior, and I don't even remember the conversation. May the Lord bless Sarah for just even remotely indulging this, but it
Oh
was
my
just like,
gosh.
What a
Eraser,
trooper.
you've never seen Eraserhead? Let's just put it on. And I put it on just knowing what was about to happen. But like for some reason, again, maybe because I'd watched Twin Peaks and was starting to like get on that wavelength, it was like the polar opposite experience of the first time I'd watched it, where I was just so like, almost borderline like trying to keep the movie away from me at arm's length. This time I was like completely embracing it, and meanwhile Sarah's next to me just like, why are we like, why did you put this on? And I'm like,
What is
no,
happening?
just go, like, don't ask questions, just go with it. But I suddenly understood what my friend Matt experienced when he brought it.
You paid
to
it
me.
forward.
But I paid it forward, and I feel so proud, and I'm sure she feels really thrilled at that moment. I'm sure she was really thrilled we were married. But I'm curious as to what, Annie, you mentioned themes and certain things. What are some of the things you picked up on? Because there's some very specific ideas. David Lynch has never flat out said what any of his movies are about, but I
Mhm.
think this one is not explicit because it's so baffling, but I think there are some interesting things going on in it. So I wanted to see what both of you, and we'll start with Annie, what both of you picked up and what you feel like the movie is trying to convey or say about whatever its subject is.
Sure. So like I said, I did a little bit of reading, so I have some things to fall back on here. But I read that obviously in Eraserhead, the man Henry, that's his name,
Henry.
right?
Yeah, sadly his
Henry.
name is not actually Eraserhead as we thought, as we originally predicted.
When I explained what Eraserhead was to AJ, my boyfriend, for the podcast listeners, when I explained to him, because he hasn't seen the film and actively decided he was not watching it with me today, he said, I am not in the mood for that. I said, fair.
Good for him, knowing his boundaries.
Good man, good man.
Yeah, explaining to him, well, it's like literally they make erasers out of his head. And he goes, what? And I was like, no, I'm not kidding. Like, that's literally, like, it's as
That
simple,
happens.
as explicit as it can be. It happens. But yeah, so outside of that, I mean, clearly Henry becomes a dad, and there's a lot of like tension and anxiety of like him becoming a dad when he doesn't like he doesn't not want to be a dad, but it got thrust upon him. And not only that, it got thrust upon him in the most alarming way of all time, where
Also
it's not.
spontaneously, like, wasn't it like it had only been a couple weeks?
Yeah, he
And the
just met
mom is
this
like,
like.
by the way, there's a baby. And he's like, what?
Yeah,
Doesn't he
and I
say
mean,
that's not possible? Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's like, what do you, how is that like? And oh my God, like that that family scene hooked me so hard,
yeah,
of him just sitting so uncomfortable, so awkward. Like Henry is a good metaphor for viewers of Eraserhead, where he is just as uncomfortable as you are the entire movie.
that's a good point. He's just staring aghast for so much of it, just completely like freaked out.
Oh my
I
God. Yeah, so I mean, I think I read that, like I can't take credit for that analysis, but like w- reading that he it was like just like being a dad and like how uncomfortable it is. And like I read that like David Lynch, I think, had become a father like pretty much around the same time
yeah, I think
as
a few
making the
years
movie.
prior to
Yeah.
starting the
Yeah,
film.
so like there, I mean, not to say he was like playing on real life at all, but like I don't know, you're a dad now. You know more about being a dad than I
Oh,
do.
I have, well, the last time I watched Eraserhead was pro- a little more than a year ago, and I had a feeling. I just knew I was. I kind of like, again, spiritually, I think David Lynch and I were best. We're the best of buds, and we are tuned into something because I just had the sudden urge to watch Eraserhead, and I was watching it, and I'm like, I'm gonna be a dad. I know. And a few days later, we found out Sarah was pregnant, and it was like Eraserhead manifested
Oh
that, and
wow,
it was. I don't know if that's a good thing. I
that's
don't know. I
spooky.
still don't know if that's a good thing. But it was just like a few days later. No joke. It was like
Hmm.
I just knew. But yeah, I can say. I can confirm to anyone out there that Eraserhead is 100% what it's like to be a dad. In case anybody's wondering, actually watching the scenes now of just like him and and his girlfriend, wife,
Mary.
just like
Mary,
as
yeah.
the babies, Mary as the babies, just like screaming and upset, and just her yelling at it. It's just like Sarah and I were watching. We're like, oh no,
And fighting
this
for
is a
space in the
little bit too
bed.
close to home. And our poor dog Winnie, is sitting there like very alert as the baby's crying because she has had to deal with an actual crying baby, and she's kind of watching us like, are you guys gonna do anything? And we're like, no, Winnie, this is just our lives now. Our lives are Eraserhead. But I feel like, again, David Lynch films tend to defy easy explanation, but I think the idea of fatherhood and David Lynch's fears of fatherhood I think that's the one thing he's kind of confirmed, like that it's like, yeah, I just become a dad, and I think those fears and anxieties kind of manifested themselves. But is that something you picked up on, or how do you feel about that?
I had to do some reading of my own to find that out, that he had his daughter not long before, and apparently he'd spent some time in Philadelphia in a tough neighborhood, and just kind of that ambient stress of like crime and general chaos happening around him really bled into this film a lot. So that all I couldn't, have gleaned from it myself, but I definitely picked up on the how to phrase this. The little creatures that like the baby ends up being one. They're
Yes.
they're very sperm-like, those shapes.
Yeah.
And when the radiator lady is stomping on them, and it's like, okay, that seems like a metaphor.
Got it. So
And
the woman who's going
Interesting.
to rescue him is basically saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this. It'll never happen again."
yeah, and the other thing I noticed, and maybe this is just me, but I noticed the radiator lady had this very odd makeup, and it almost looked like there were these like bean-like shapes on her cheeks
Yeah.
in the makeup, and I was like, are those ovaries? They look a little bit like ovaries. I was just seeing a lot of reproductive imagery. So that is kind of the main thread that I picked up on as, feeling like a larger metaphor for reproductive anxiety, for lack of a better phrase, and that kind of fear of responsibility, when Mary goes to leave because she needs to sleep, and Henry is just so clearly like horrified by that. He's like, "You're going to come back tomorrow, right?" He's like terrified to be alone with this baby.
He's also like, as far as lack of responsibilities go, like she works and he's on vacation, quote unquote.
Yeah, I thought that
Yeah.
was so odd that he's kind of just doing nothing. He's a very just blank canvas of a character. Just based on the way he looks, I kind of read him as like a David Lynch surrogate, with like the pocket protector and the way he speaks and his hair and
Yeah. The way he speaks, I was like, it sounds like he's a voiceover almost, like
I
a
thought that too.
David Lynch voiceover. Yeah. Though his cadence was very like, I'm sure that was intentional.
It seemed like
And
it.
but to be fair, speaking to Scott's point, like the idea of maybe not a lack of responsibility, because clearly David Lynch is an insane worker and so insanely devoted to his craft that he made this movie even though it took him 4 or 5 years to do it.
And he
But
did
I
like
think
6 different things on it too. He did like the
yeah,
production
he's
design, sound effects, visual
right.
effects, edited it,
He
directed
he
it,
built a
obviously.
whole bunch of stuff. Like, I mean, it's just it's literally like him and his friends just like, and they would fund the movie. And I think Jack Fisk is the guy's name who plays the creepy guy, the man in the planet, I think is the name of the guy who pulls the levers and
Right.
looks diseased. He was married, and I think still is married, to Sissy Spacek, and they would just feed David Lynch money, and David Lynch would do a newspaper route. And Catherine Coulson, who was Jack Nance's, who plays Henry, his girlfriend, and she also ended up being the log lady in Twin Peaks. She was just involved doing a bunch of things and helping him out. Like, it's just insane the amount of effort that went into it. But I think at the time, the idea of Henry, he's on vacation, he doesn't have any real responsibilities, or he fears real responsibility, I think that was very real for Lynch, the idea of having to like give up art to be a dad or to like get a real job. And I think his family, I don't know if it was during the filming of Eraserhead, it might have been right around this time. His family like held an intervention for him and basically said just that. Like they were like, you need to give up this movie and
Oh,
go get a
wow.
real job, and like
Whoa.
you're scaring us. And he said that was, I think he was, I don't know if he said he burst into tears then or after, but he said it was one of the like worst moments of his life. Just like that conversation of people, his
Oh, man.
family just not remotely believing in him. But you sense those anxieties and fears in kind of the DNA of the movie, even if they're not explicitly stated. I think you're onto something, Scott. Just the idea of trying to forego true responsibility or being afraid of it.
And I thought
Mhm.
also there's a long stretch in the middle of this film where Henry is essentially trapped in his apartment with this baby. And I feel like if I had watched this for the first time during lockdown, I would have lost my mind entirely. But there's definitely a sense of like claustrophobia and just being like, he's being suffocated by this responsibility. I felt
Mhm.
that really intensely, just being in that small space and spending so much time there.
Yeah, and the noises did not help at all in those circumstances. Like just
Yep.
all of the buzzing, and I mean, I watched it with the captions on because I always have captions on, and every single time something happened, it's like radiator hissing, like white noise, like all of these different things, and I mean, they're so loud. Like it's I don't know. There's the scene that like I'm still thinking about, of course, is the one where Mary's about to leave and she yells at the baby, like we've already talked about it, but just like how viscerally I felt that, like I'm not even like I don't ever want children, but like having so like no offense to the new dad,
No
like
offense to anybody
As
who
a
you're
former
has had children.
child,
But
I am
frankly, I think Eraserhead is certainly a rousing call to never have
yeah,
children.
like I, as someone that has known their entire life that like children is not really a part of my future that I personally want. Um, it just was so visceral, that feeling of just like feeling so trapped. And like Mary clearly like there's the part in the when she's with the mom when they are having the um whole conversation about like we're having this baby, and she goes like, well, we don't know if it's a baby yet, and I'm like, okay, but what, like hang on, like
What is she? I can't remember what she says, but like the line she says when she's just like bursting into sobs and talking to Henry, like, "Is that okay?"
yeah,
Like,
he goes, is it okay, yeah, she
if you
says like,
marry
is
me.
that okay that we're
yeah,
getting that if you
yeah.
marry me, or that we're
The
getting
least
married, and it's
romantic
just like
proposal in
It's
all of film.
it's so Eraserhead, and I think all of David Lynch's films are funny to an extent. Some of them overtly. So
mhm,
Eraserhead is definitely one of his. I don't want to say it's not funny, but it's certainly more disturbing than funny as far as like the spectrum goes. But things like that I find hysterical for some reason. And also like her leaving when she's just at the edge of the end of the bed, doing something like against the bed, and you're
Shaking the
like,
bed
what the
frame.
hell is going on? She's shaking the bed, and then you realize she's just been desperately trying to get the suitcase out
yeah,
from under the bed.
which made
And
me
I could
think
just,
like, is the suitcase empty? Like
yes,
she didn't
I could
fill it, she just took it.
I can also see like that being maybe a very specific moment from David Lynch's life, like maybe his wife at the time like getting really upset at him, and then just not like a comedy of errors of her not being able to get a suitcase out from under the bed. It just felt
Mhm.
so like, so it's such a domestic moment in such a nightmarish film that it felt like it must have come from his real life. But there are lots of moments in the film that are very funny, but I think Eraserhead, maybe like, I mean, in terms of dream logic and things, where sometimes this dream that is kind of horrifying can be funny. I think more often than not it's just utterly disturbing.
Yeah,
One of my
for sure.
favorite
And
Sorry. One of my favorite funny little exchanges is when Mary's mom is kind of grilling Henry, and she's like, "What do you do?" He goes, "I'm on vacation." She goes, "Well, what did you do?" Like it was just like a very kind of clever little like isolated moment.
And her dad, Mary's dad, just being like, and then like was his legs or his like his arm,
Look at
and
my
he's talking about
knees.
like, yeah, and he's talking about turning a faucet. And I don't remember what it is, but then the chickens start to move, like, and it's just horrifying, and they're bleeding, and the mom is like drooling or something, and then she like it turns into just wailing, and she runs into the other room, and Bill just goes, "She'll be all right." It's just like,
Oh,
The
we
creepy
haven't even.
smile on his face. Oh,
Oh
yeah.
my God.
God.
We haven't even talked about the grandma that's just
Oh
in the
yeah, who's
kitchen.
only in that
Oh,
one
yeah.
scene, and they help her stir the food. I
Well,
think like they're just like, here
she
you go.
like unwillingly, it seems like, because she's clearly paralyzed, and then they stick a cigarette in her mouth, leave the oven open, and turn off the light. That was
I
like,
want to.
I was sitting here and I was like, are we gonna get back to the grandma? And then we do, but she's in the room again with the lights now on, the cigarette smoked, question mark, and she's asleep. What?
I want to do some hypnotherapy on David Lynch and just find out like again, I think some of this is so clearly drawn from personal experience. It just feels that way. And I want to know, like, yeah, what is the grandma? Where did that come from? Was there just like a grandma, and like, did you go to have dinner with your girlfriend's family or your wife's family and announce the pregnancy, and maybe there was a grandma in the corner who was someone was just giving her cigarettes and putting them in her mouth? Like, I just all these random specific details that maybe they mean, like, maybe it's nothing, like maybe it's just like, oh, this is weird and let's put it in the movie. But there's a part of me that's like, some of these details are so specific that I just want to know the truth about like where they came from.
It's a good
Yeah.
point.
One thing that I was wondering as I was watching this, so during quarantine, AJ and I were watching a lot of Twilight Zone. And do we know if David Lynch was inspired by Twilight Zone at all? Because there are some scenes, just the way they were shot, that were just so Twilight Zone-esque. Not even just because it's like, oh, it's weird, but just like the angles and like the very long takes where nothing was happening
Hmm.
and all of that. I'm just sitting here like, and I mean, it was black and white on top of all of that. It didn't need to be black and white. There was color in the 70s, right?
Sure, yeah, we're
Just
film
kidding.
scholars, we know our
Yeah,
history.
what's happening? But do
I'm
y'all know?
sure. Well, I'm sure it had to have been. Like, I don't think he's ever flat out like said like, "Oh yeah, Twilight Zone was one of my favorite shows," but that same style, that same mood, and just the creepiness factor, I can't imagine. I mean, that show was what, 50s, 60s, and
Hmm.
David Lynch was like a kid. Like, there's no way he didn't watch The Twilight Zone and didn't get some
Right.
manner of inspiration. He's very a huge Fellini fan, and he's talked about how much Fellini influenced him. But there are other things, I'm sure, like The Twilight Zone and things like that, that must have.
I feel like sometimes you can just absorb things like that, and particularly a movie like Eraserhead, where it feels like it's just kind of bubbling up out of his subconscious. Like I could
Mm.
see, him having grown up on something like The Twilight Zone, and then it just kind of absorbs into this other thing he's doing.
There's something about this that feels so perfectly manifested. Like, I think it, okay, on a general visceral level, you watch this for the first time and it's just like, this is disturbing and I feel overwhelmed by what I'm seeing. And I think in retrospect, as I've watched it, like the second time I watched it, I was like, oh my God, this is, and I would still say this, I think it's a perfect film. Like, I think in terms of what it's trying to do and in terms of what, I mean, just in terms of what he was attempting to do with the movie, it feels like a perfect expression to me. Like it's an hour and a half. It's it's a stunning movie, and its sound design and every cinematic element of it is so overwhelming and so effective at what it's trying to do. I I think I said that this is my favorite of his films. It's hard to pick. Like, I'm a big Blue Velvet fan. I think Mulholland Drive is great. Um, but there's a part of me that feels like right out of the gate, it's shocking that he was so like fully formed. Like I feel like you could watch Eraserhead and know like, oh, I know exactly what this guy's about. And sometimes filmmakers, it takes them a few efforts to find their footing or to find their voice. Was there anything for both of you, maybe we'll start with Scott, about the film where you were just like, aside from feeling just like, oh my God, what's happening? Were there moments where you were able to admire what Lynch was doing or what he was pulling off, or was it just so visceral that you were kind of just like overwhelmed by the experience?
Oddly enough, my reaction as soon as it was over was that I wanted to watch it again. Um, I don't know. I was just I agree with everything you said about how fully realized it was. And it felt kind of like one of those things where if you look at what else he's done through the lens of this, it's sort of like a skeleton key to everything he's interested in. Like the Lady in the Radiator, that little cabaret in there felt very like Black Lodgy to me. It just felt very much like, looking inside his brain. But I was taking notes as I was watching, and there are definitely a couple different lines where I started typing in all caps. But aside from those moments,
Wait, I want to know. What were the all caps? I want to know what
let's
inspired
see.
this.
About 30 minutes in, you see the baby, and oh God, it's like E.T. fell into a vat of toxic waste.
Oh no!
Yeah, so here's the disturbing thing about the baby too, is that David Lynch will not reveal, and nobody involved with the production will reveal how that baby was made. And Lynch has been like, "Oh yeah, maybe I found it somewhere and just put
I
it in the
read
movie." And
that.
it's like, okay, all
What?
right. And you look at, I mean, you watch it, and frankly, I don't know what the hell it is. I don't want to know what it is, but there is this feeling of like, how did they make this?
I agree completely. It's kind of that dual question of, okay, how much of this is some kind of actual living tissue, and how much of this is being manipulated or puppeteered somehow? I know you mentioned in the first segment of the show that, there were some special effects in here that people to this day are wondering how he pulled off. And I was very much
Yeah.
like looking out for that kind of stuff. And oof, it delivered. That was Annie, when you mentioned, the use of black and white, I thought it actually made it creepier when things like the little tiny chicken or, the tree or whatever would bleed, because it's just black.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, that was more disturbing than just actually, blood would have been.
Right. I mean, that was the whole thing that Hitchcock did famously, was like in the scenes like where there's blood spurting everywhere. I think it was chocolate syrup, if I remember correctly. Like
That
I'm
sounds right.
pretty sure like yeah, like I that definitely felt a little bit like a callback for me of just like, oh, well, I guess it like
Like
you can
Psycho.
just have this like yeah, a little bit. Yeah, like you can have like this viscous gross blood, but like who's to say what color is
Yeah.
like really what is that?
Psycho was also a film that was made when color stock was readily available to him, and I think North by Northwest was the film prior to that, and that was in color.
Yeah.
And another film that very much was like a purposeful decision to shoot it in black and white instead of color.
Yeah, I feel like you can do so much with the shadows of what is happening. It feels like there's always more when it's black and white, just because you can't see half the screen half the time. Um, but back to your question of like something that like I was like, wow, David Lynch is doing it. Like he is doing it. Was the scene, the pencil factory scene. The way that it was filmed was like they were at like Willy Wonka's like chocolate factory, and just like these like just gratuitous close-up shots of like the pencils being made, and it's like they're all on the conveyor belt, and it gave me like this might I don't know if this is a everywhere thing, but Scott will know as a Florida thing. But at Krispy Kreme, you can watch the conveyor belts of the donuts being made. Like they have a glass wall, and behind the glass wall is the donut factory, as I called it as a kid, and you can watch
That's
the
right.
donuts like being made in real time, going up and down this elevator of donuts and like getting flipped over into the oil. And it was like that's all I could think about during this pencil scene, which
You
bothered me,
wanted donuts.
knowing that it was a dude's head. Like, it just, I was just like, I cannot enjoy this. I just watched this thing get drilled out of this man's head, and I know it's a dream and I know it's not real, but
Do
I'm
we
just
know
like,
that though? Like it's like
I
there's never really a moment where it's I remember the first time I watched all that happen just being like, all right, I okay, like just not like completely like if I'd been trying to keep up with the film at that point, I think I gave up. Like I was like, I think I'm done. Like the second like his head pops off and the little
the
Eraserhead
aliens inside
baby
him,
face is
yeah.
just screaming and
Ugh.
like I was just like, what is going on? I have so many like favorite amazing moments from this movie. I think
Agreed.
the scenes that I forget about that disturb me not more than like scenes we've already described, but unsettles me a lot that I don't know if they're talked about as much because so much in this film is so utterly striking that you're like, oh, Eraserhead baby. That's what stands out to me. But the scenes of the woman across the hall seducing him and
Oh,
just
yes.
like the soundtrack, like just that unsettling tone as like they are in bed together in the pool of whatever and they just kind of sink into the like all that stuff is so the lighting is obviously very stark, but in those moments, it's like he kind of just dimmed the lights even more, and the lighting just makes it even more disturbing. Plus the
Mhm.
sound. I think those scenes are ones that stick with me more just these days. Although, frankly, the whole thing it's hard to dismiss any of it, but I almost feel like people don't talk about those moments as much because they are not normal in the sense of normal, like they are definitely not, but I think in terms of when you put them in context with everything else happening in the movie, it's easy to just sort of brush those scenes aside and be like, oh yeah, he has an affair with the woman across the hall and it's weird. Yeah, also his head falls off and the kid brings it to an eraser factory and
It was
that happens too.
merciful that the head prop was nowhere near as good as the baby prop.
Yeah.
Honestly. Honestly, the head looked fake.
Yeah.
And
That was
especially with like
necessary.
that a proud little kid carrying it around like it's a soccer ball. I just was like, what is going on? Like this, it's how why I like I know once again it's a dream world, nothing makes sense. But like the kid, it was his trophy. I don't know. It was very strange. Very
Two
strange. That's the Eraserhead story.
Amen. Two very memorable moments for me. Both involve the baby, but also both kind of landed in that weird zone between horrifying and funny that we were talking about before.
Mm.
When Henry is watching the baby on his own and he takes its temperature and it seems okay, but then just suddenly out of nowhere it's sick and it
Oh
looks
my god,
completely
it's
different.
horrifying.
It's very horrifying, but I also just found it so funny because of the way that it's timed. Like the baby
Yeah, the
is,
cutting is incredible. It's
yeah,
I think I literally went like in that scene I was like, "Oh, baby has a fever." And then the flash I go, "Whoa!" Like I think I like literally made a like, "Oh my God" sound like
I think one of the more disturbing scenes also is when he finally I guess indulges the temptation to cut open the cocoon
oh
and just
yeah.
starts stabbing it. I oh
By that
this
point,
movie.
it reminded me a bit of the end of Hereditary, where you're like, oh, so just
Yeah.
all bets are off now, and
Yeah.
we're going full horror show. One
I
reading
did
that I liked was that the Radiator Lady represents Henry's subconscious. So when she's stomping on the sperm creatures, she's representing his like subconscious desire to not have a baby. And then
Right.
when
mhm.
he finally gives in to that temptation and does away with the baby, she hugs him and it's like, you did the right thing, pal. Um, I thought that was an interesting, not my reading that, but I thought it was an interesting one.
I like that. Andy, what were you gonna say?
I don't remember.
It was something.
I was into that analogy. Like that makes sense. Like you're right. That I don't even remember what I was like. It was not as important as that, honestly.
Can we talk
I
about the cackling of the baby? Because when the
oh
baby
my
cackles,
gosh.
I lost it.
I was mad. I was just like, get rid of this thing. Like just get rid
Yeah.
of it. I don't know, put
Yeah,
it in
at
the
that point
hallway.
when he stabs it, you're kind of, I don't know, it was kind of asking for it at that point.
That's
Yeah.
probably
Did he
why they
stab it
did that.
before or after? I can't remember.
It's after,
Mhm.
but
Okay.
they're back to back. So that's a good
Okay.
point, actually. That's probably why the cackling happens, because it's like you gotta not feel so much for the baby before that happens.
Are there any other big standout moments for you two, or anything that caught you off guard? Annie, I imagine the whole movie, I mean, the whole movie is so upsetting and strange that it's just a constant process of being caught off guard. But Annie, because your prediction of the film was so different from what the film was. For both of you, was there anything that surprised you, whether it was, and we'll start with Annie, whether it was the idea of like, oh, this movie is kind of about fears of fatherhood and things like that. What were the things that surprised you the most? Like that you were, it's a weird question to ask when it comes to a David Lynch movie, but like, was there anything that you really weren't expecting to
Oh, I
happen
mean,
that
I
happened?
was fully not expecting musical numbers. And I will admit, as I was watching, like when it was sort of slower towards the beginning, like I was scrolling through like the Wikipedia page, made sure not to push the plot button. So I
Smart.
did not get any spoilers, but I
Mm.
did get the musical numbers, and they talked a little bit about that, and I'm sitting here like, if this goes into a full-fledged musical, I'm turning it off. I can't, I don't know, I don't even understand
I would
how,
have had the
like,
exact opposite reaction. I would have been like,
no,
how
I
can I
was
just like crush the DVD and just inject it into my body?
no, I could not, from the beginning of being like as surreal and just like nonsensical into that like familial drama just like right then and there. I would, and then they're in the room with the baby for what feels like the rest of the movie. I just like in that moment I was just like, where is the musical coming in? Like who's singing? Like is the baby thing singing? Like cuz if that's happening, I'm out.
Scott, what about you?
I think I went in with the kind of mindset where nothing was really going to surprise me. Uh, you know, that's that's not exactly how
That's
it
how
played
David
out.
Lynch works.
It was a very shocking movie, but one thing that I liked, like I don't know if y'all saw Tenet, but there's a line that was in the Tenet trailers where a character just goes, "Don't try to understand it, just feel it," and it
Yeah.
kind of functions as like advice for enjoying that movie. And I thought that one like little moment from this that stuck out to me as like advice for enjoying the movie is when Mary's dad turns to Henry and goes, "Well, Henry, what do you know?" And Henry just goes, "Oh, I don't know much of anything." Like I just kind of I read that as just like surrendering to just not having any idea what's happening.
Yeah,
And
the thesis statement of the film.
yeah, and so that kind of helped me. I was like, "Oh, I don't have to know much of anything because neither does Henry."
There's this one guy, I don't remember his name, but he's on YouTube and he does these insane, like 3-4 hour long dissections of like Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive, and really getting in depth and analyzing it beyond the level of like, oh, Mulholland Drive, it's like a takedown of Hollywood. It's like, no. He goes deeper and deeper, and like as deep as you can go, like with about the most well thought out, exhaustive analysis of the film. And I, I don't know. There's a part of me that doesn't really. I've said this before about David Lynch, and I'll continue to say it. There's a part of me that just doesn't want to know. Like I am all about what Scott's saying, like the idea of just don't think, just feel it. That I think is the best way to approach David Lynch. You can analyze it, and I think what makes David Lynch's film so powerful is I think his best films, even films like this where it's like, what's happening? Is there a point to any of it? There seems to be a very purposeful thought process behind it, where it doesn't, as random as things might seem or as nonsensical as they might seem, I get the sense that there's a meaning and a purpose, and I just don't understand it because I haven't ascended to whatever transcendental meditation level David Lynch is on. But it's also felt to me like in the same way that I like you listen to a song that you love without really understanding why you love it, and it's like you could be like, all right, well, I think I like it because the bridge at this point in the notes, like he goes up to this high note and that's really but it's like you almost don't think about it, you just accept what it is, and trying to analyze it almost ruins the magic in a way. And that's how I feel about David Lynch, and particularly Eraserhead, because it's so perfect and as what it is. I'm kind of like, I don't, maybe it is about his fears of fatherhood, for sure that is an element in it, but I don't know that I need to know much else, and I don't know that I like, if someone were to come to me and be like, well, what's it about, like I don't understand it, I'd be like, yeah, that's kind of why it's so great. Like I don't need to understand it, and it is what it is, and
It,
maybe that's the point.
it's kind of like the idea that explaining why a joke is funny makes it not funny.
Yes, exactly. You lose the magic a little bit when you have to start like, well, it's this and that. And there's so many great like memes and videos of him in interviews, like where people are like, can you tell us what it's about? And he's like, nope. Or there's one where somebody says, he says, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film, and the interviewer goes, care to elaborate on that? And he goes, no.
I
It's
saw
like
Annie
things
post
like
that
that.
tonight.
Yeah.
I tweeted that
Did
because
you? Oh, I love.
I did because I was not like, I tweeted before I watched the movie, like David Lynch and then Eraserhead, like the screen grabs from like the title credits, and I was like, oh hell yeah, this is gonna be so fun. And then literally almost an hour and 30 minutes later, I posted that meme. And
Well,
I
I
said,
think.
David, please explain.
Yes. Well, his idea, I think, that is so powerful and really kind of beautiful is the audience, each individual audience member, each individual viewer is going to bring their interpretation, their feelings, their unique emotions that are unique to each person out there. Everyone's going to have a different experience watching something. And for him, he believes like that is crucial to the film viewing experience. And so
Mhm.
for him to then impose upon that very spiritual thing with his own like, well, this is what I was trying to say, it removes the power of the film, and it removes your part in making the film ascend to whatever level. So I've always admired that, and I've always kind of steered away. As amazing as those video essays are, again, I can't remember the guy who does them. They're really, again, really incredible. If you really feel like learning what Twin Peaks is all about, go watch it. But like for me, I'm like, you know what? I don't need to know, and I almost don't want to know, because, like you said, Scott, it's like explaining the joke.
Speaking of magic, it could also just be, like explaining how a magic trick is done. You're like, I'm not concerned with the mechanics of it so much as I am the effect that it has on me. I don't want to take
Yes.
that away by, looking under the hood and like seeing how it works.
What else do we have to say? Anything else? We've covered many things. We've had wonderful conversations. Any other thoughts on Eraserhead? Any final statements we want to make before giving our final ratings?
My only other thing that really jumped out to me about this was how silent so much of it was. Not completely because of the sound effects that we talked about earlier, but just how dialogueless it is. I clocked it, and it's 10 minutes before there's any dialogue. And then at the end,
Oh, wow.
for the last 20 to 30 minutes, there's none whatsoever.
Sarah, who has seen the film, was watching it with me, and she's like, wait, is this a silent film? And I'm like, no, this isn't. But then, to be fair, it kind of is black and white, kind of throwback, very visually oriented, but it would work as a silent film.
I was gonna say, I bet if you muted it, you'd lose a lot, obviously, but I bet you'd still kind of understand about as much as we did if you watched it with on mute.
Annie, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'll end my final thoughts with the end of the movie where, I mean, going on what Scott is saying, like the silence at the very end when they're like in the embrace or whatever, the radiator woman and Henry, and then it cuts to black, and then it's just a black screen for like a good 15-20 seconds. I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, is it done? I don't trust that it's over. And then it was over. But just like I felt like that was such like I don't feel often when I watch something where I ask like, are we done? You know? And David
Can I
Lynch
go?
has a yeah, like not this I feel like everything I've said makes me sound like I didn't like this movie, but I
It's a
genuinely
lot.
enjoyed it. I
I
genuinely
mean,
enjoyed it.
Eraserhead, as much as I love it, I don't know that I would pick it as like the first David Lynch movie for anybody. I mean,
No,
maybe some
God,
people
no.
might be able to handle it. Yeah, Annie, so you both are like, I think, Scott, you've seen more David Lynch than Annie has, but Annie, are you curious to watch more? Are you
Um,
interested in plunging into this world, or do you need a step back first and
I
to
oh,
regain your senses?
I mean, I always need a period of reflection, as I call
Mhm.
it, as my stepping back from a director if he makes me feel uncomfortable while watching movies, which David Lynch has, he's great at A plus work, David. Like, I felt crazy watching this movie. But like I've seen I it's been a good 6 months since I've seen a David Lynch movie. The last one was Mulholland Drive. So perhaps in 6 months I'll be ready to try something else. I'm not in any way turned off to his movies. It's just a lot to process every time.
What about you, Scott? You've seen a few, I believe.
I have. It's been years since I saw Mulholland Drive. I've been meaning to kind of work my way back through basically everything he's done. Dune has been on my mind a lot lately, obviously because of the new
Yeah.
one. Um,
Of
And
course.
I've
so
never seen Dune.
yeah, I might have to give that a shot. But yeah, I for the reasons that we've been discussing, where he makes stories that kind of create spaces for you to read your own meaning into them. Um, I think that's generally like a beautiful way to make art, and I love any artist who does that. Um, it can feel like work. That sounds like maybe what Annie is describing is
Hmm.
because with things like that, if you're not if you don't have the mental energy to and again we kind of touched on this in the first portion, but if you're not willing to kind of explore what they're presenting and read it different ways or kind of find your own meaning within it, it takes participation. You can't just passively
Mm.
sit there and watch things blow up and pithy dialogue. It's you gotta like involve yourself in it and really plumb the depths of your psyche. So it takes effort and it takes energy, and I get that not everyone wants that from their entertainment. Some people just want to throw something on and turn their brain off. But I think that whenever I have the time and wherewithal to dive into one of his wild dreamscapes, it's always an unforgettable experience.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do final ratings. Do we just want to do do we want to do bleeding mini chickens, or do we want to do Eraserhead babies? Let's just do Eraserhead babies. How many, Scott, we'll start with you. How many Eraserhead babies, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, would you give Eraserhead?
I am giving this 4 Eraserhead babies and a bleeding mini chicken, which counts as half of an Eraserhead baby.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. Okay, great. Annie, what about you?
I was actually gonna go with 4.5 Eraserhead babies.
There you go.
So I guess I too am doing 4 babies, 1 chicken.
What should I, if I'm giving it perfect 5, is that all Eraserhead babies? Is that chicken, like do the chickens add up to,
You could do
how
10
many
tiny
chickens add up
chickens.
to 10 tiny chickens, 5 Eraserhead babies, and 1 decapitated Henry head equals what I think is still my favorite of his movies. I really don't know, but this is, I think, always impressive and always wonderful to watch because it's just insane that this is his first movie.
It's crazy.
But this has been a blast. What a wonderful way to spend a Halloween episode of Missing Frames talking about one of my favorite filmmakers with two of my favorite people.
Aw.
Scott and Annie, you're both wonderful. Thank you so much. Scott, if people
you.
want to find you in the wonderful world of the internet, where can they do so?
I am P. Scott Russell at most of the websites. Very, very much on Twitter all the time.
Annie,
It's
what about
true.
you?
I too am very much on Twitter at Hello Annie Black, and also on all of the websites at Hello Annie Black, pretty much. Yeah, but mostly Twitter, to be honest.
David Lynch is on Twitter too, and he uses it occasionally to tremendous effect. And I don't know if does he post his weather reports to Twitter?
He
No,
doesn't.
those I think are just YouTube exclusives.
Okay. Well, either way, they're wherever you can find them. Please watch them. And thank you again, both of you, for being a part of this. Thank you, audience, for listening. And happy Halloween. We will see you at the movies.
Yes, fine.